Could it actually happen? Alberta calling it quits with Canada after a 120-year-long marriage?
We're looking at a majority of people who are right now looking at Alberta separation as an issue that is real.
However, he also found that 58% of Albertans think separation is a real possibility.
It started with whispers, quiet conversations in cafes, coded language on message boards, and off-the-record remarks from small-town mayors who normally wouldn't dare challenge Ottawa. But over the past few months, those whispers grew louder. And now, the western provinces of Canada, once seen as loyal, if frustrated members of the Confederation, have dropped a political bombshell that has left the entire country stunned. Western separation. Not just talk, not just protest, but formal declarations, legislative motions, and backroom coordination that suggest, for the first time in decades, this isn't just political theater, it's a movement. Alberta started it. Premier Jacob Kincaid, known for his fierce stance on provincial autonomy and disdain for federal overreach, called an emergency session of the provincial legislature. What emerged from that session wasn't just tough talk, it was a formal resolution. The Western Sovereignty Framework Bill, introduced and passed by a majority vote, declared that Alberta would begin creating a parallel governance structure to defend its economic and cultural interests from hostile federal interference. The resolution stopped just short of full-blown separation, but the implications were clear. Alberta was laying the groundwork for a constitutional crisis.
And if only a minority actually wanted to. I mean, there's always been an element at the fringes with an appetite for the idea. What's changed? I on this stuff for decades have been warning that the idea of Alberta separating is not feeling as fringy as it used to. To office, organizers of a push for a referendum on the question of secession tell CBC News they've seen a surge in interest.
Then Saskatchewan followed, and then Manitoba. By the end of the week, all three provinces had signed a trilateral Prairie Pact, declaring that if Ottawa continued with what they described as ideological economic sabotage through carbon taxes, energy restrictions, and agricultural regulations, the provinces would begin exploring all legal and constitutional pathways toward full independence. It wasn't just a threat, it was an ultimatum, and Canada wasn't ready. Prime Minister Declan Ross appeared visibly rattled during a surprise press briefing in Ottawa. Flanked by ministers who looked just as stunned as he did, Ross condemned the Prairie Pact as dangerous, divisive, and fundamentally unconstitutional. He warned that any attempt to undermine the federal union would face swift and decisive legal action. But his tone wasn't confident. It was panicked. Because deep down, everyone in that room knew this wasn't coming out of nowhere. Western alienation has been simmering for years, decades even. For many Albertans and Saskatchewanians, it's not just about policy. It's about respect, or the lack of it. They see themselves as the economic backbone of Canada, farming the land, powering the energy grid, and exporting billions in oil and grain. But in return, they feel vilified by urban political elites, dismissed by media narratives, and handcuffed by regulations written thousands of kilometers away. And now, with inflation rising, pipelines stalled, and rural economies buckling under carbon penalties, something has snapped. In Alberta, protesters surrounded the legislature chanting, "Ottawa out! Alberta first!" In Regina, farmers waved signs comparing the federal government to a foreign occupier. In Winnipeg, hundreds of small business owners shut their doors in solidarity with what they're calling the Prairie Uprising. And in British Columbia, a province long divided between its left-leaning coast and conservative interior, something unexpected happened. A group of rural MLAs introduced a bill mirroring Alberta's sovereignty framework. It failed in the first vote, but it signaled something bigger, that this wasn't just a prairie revolt. It was spreading. By the following week, polling data sent shockwaves through Parliament Hill. A full 48% of Albertans said they would support full independence if a referendum were held today. In Saskatchewan, that number was 45%. Even in Manitoba, usually the most moderate of the Western trio, support for separation had climbed to 39%. And it wasn't just talk.
Citizens who want a separate Alberta are now calling for it outside the legislature, and Conseco is drawing a straight line from that. The group thinks it'll be no problem securing the number of signatures needed to trigger a vote, in part because Danielle Smith is making that.
I support the process of citizens being able to choose an issue that they care about and then being able to get enough signatures.
In Calgary, a group of prominent legal scholars began drafting what they called the Western Constitution. In Edmonton, business leaders met in private to discuss the logistics of creating a new central bank. And in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, a town of just 16,000 people, the mayor declared his city would no longer enforce federal carbon surcharges on farmers. The country's political foundation was cracking in real time. The media scrambled. National anchors openly questioned whether Canada was entering its most dangerous constitutional moment since the Quebec referendums. Political commentators debated whether Ross had lost control of the narrative or the country itself. And then, a single leaked phone call made things worse. A recording surfaced, allegedly of a senior federal minister, mocking Alberta's sovereignty push as the tantrum of hillbilly oil barons. The backlash was immediate. Premier Kincaid called it the final insult. Saskatchewan Premier Danielle Hart said it proved everything we've been saying for years, that they see us as a colony, not a partner. The next day, the Prairie Pact provinces held a joint press conference announcing the formation of the Western Accord Council, a new interprovincial body designed to coordinate trade, energy production, and agricultural policy independently of Ottawa. They even appointed their own foreign affairs spokesperson. Canada was now looking at something it had never seen before, a government within a government. Ottawa responded with threats of legal injunctions, but it was too late. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was emotional. One farmer in Red Deer told a CBC reporter, "We fought for Canada. My grandfather bled in a uniform with a maple leaf on it, but this ain't the country he fought for. This ain't fair. They tax us like we're the enemy." In Vancouver, counter-protests broke out, accusing the Western provinces of destroying national unity. But in the rural towns that stretch across the prairies, those protests only confirmed their suspicions. "They hate us," one rancher said. "They hate our oil, they hate our farms, they hate our votes. So why are we still in this?" That question is now echoing louder than ever.
She is against the province separating. However, this week, her government is officially lowering the bar for citizens to initiate a referendum.
Saying no, and we have to do as we're told.
It's one of the sticking points for Albertans wanting to leave Canada. Signatures are collected within the mandatory time frame. Separating isn't an easy feat, and there are complex issues to consider.
The Bank of Canada issued a warning about economic instability arising from jurisdictional uncertainty. Foreign investors began quietly pulling money out of Calgary-based energy firms. International news outlets picked up the story. The BBC ran a headline that read, "Canada's West threatens breakaway amid rising tensions." CNN aired a segment titled, "Could Canada be headed for a split?" And then came the wild card. A group of Indigenous leaders from Alberta and Saskatchewan issued a joint statement saying they would not recognize any Western secession movement that failed to consult them first. "We are sovereign nations. We were here before Canada. We were here before Alberta. You don't get to redraw the map without us." That statement introduced a new layer of legal complexity and moral reckoning. Because many First Nations communities share Western frustrations with federal policies, but they don't trust provincial governments either. The split isn't clean, it's messy. And now, the courts are getting involved. Ottawa filed a motion in federal court to strike down the Prairie Pact's sovereignty provisions, arguing they violate Section 91 of the Constitution. But Alberta's legal team hit back with a bold claim that the provinces have a right to self-determination under international law, especially if they can prove economic or cultural harm. Legal scholars are divided. Some call it nonsense. Others say it could force a full constitutional crisis, one that might require Supreme Court intervention or even trigger another round of national constitutional talks. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. If this goes to the Supreme Court, no matter who wins, Canada loses. Because even if the federal government prevails legally, it may lose politically. If half the Western population believes the system is rigged, then legitimacy itself is on the line. And if the provinces prevail, then the map of Canada may never look the same again. There's already talk of what a Western nation would look like. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, united by pipelines, prairie identity, and a belief that Ottawa doesn't speak for them. A new currency? A flat tax economy? Friendly relations with the US? No one knows. But they're imagining it. And that imagination is spreading. In cafes, town halls, online forums, and classrooms, people are talking about separation like it's no longer fantasy, but an option. And that, more than any single vote or resolution, is what should terrify Ottawa. Because countries don't collapse from war. They collapse from disbelief. Disbelief that the center can hold. Disbelief that compromise is possible. Disbelief that unity is still worth the price. And in the vast open spaces of the Canadian West, that disbelief is growing like wildfire. Will it result in full separation? No one can say. Maybe it fizzles. Maybe Ottawa buys time with some economic concessions. Maybe the courts delay everything long enough for tempers to cool. But the damage is already done. A door has been opened, and for the first time in generations, millions of Canadians are seriously asking, what if we walked through it?